Welcome back. This lecture is the first in the current era of China's foreign policy, that of great power diplomacy. As the leader in waiting, Xi Jinping tipped his hand in 2009 that he would be pricklier than Deng while on a diplomatic visit to Mexico. In response to a question, he retorted, "Some foreigners with full bellies and nothing better to do engage in finger-pointing at us. First, China does not export revolution. Second, it does not export famine and poverty. And third, it does not mess around with you. So what else is there to say?" This statement drew a lot of concern in the West, as it was rather out of character compared to the more cautious Chinese leaders of the day. Nevertheless, it was wildly popular among Chinese citizens. It was the first sign that Xi was anxious to drive Chinese foreign policy in a different direction. Xi formally assumed the positions of power when he became Party General Secretary in November 2012 and State President and Chairman of the Central Military Commission in March 2013. It now appears he has no intention of ever giving up these positions, as he eliminated term limits in 2018. He has not made any moves to anoint a successor, breaking with the governing norms of the past 40-plus years. This will essentially allow Xi, who was born in 1953, to keep those positions for life. Xi moved steadily and deliberately to shift China's foreign policy direction away from hide and bide and toward a new great power diplomacy. He was able to use this new foreign policy approach combined with a major anti-corruption campaign to sideline rivals, consolidate power, and become the most popular and powerful Chinese leader since Mao. Since he consolidated power, Xi has used China's power to more aggressively promote its interests. As China's top leader, he is primarily responsible for managing China's most important bilateral relationship, that with the United States. In 2014, he pushed for a, quote, new type of great power relations with the U.S., saying that if the two sides got into confrontation, quote, it would surely spell disaster for both countries, end quote. This reflects extensive interest in China about the dynamics between rising powers and established powers that often result in war, including that described in Henry Kissinger's book On China, published in 2011. In his final chapter, Kissinger draws parallels between the geopolitical environment that led to the First World War between the United Kingdom, an established power, and Germany, a rising power, and that of the current rivalry between the U.S. and China. Graham Allison's team at Harvard University studied 16 cases over the past 500 years with similar power dynamics, and found that 12 of those cases led to conflict and bloodshed, although few on the scale of the world wars. Allison wrote, "When a rising power is threatening to displace a ruling power, standard crises that would otherwise be contained, like the assassination of an archduke in 1914, can initiate a cascade of reactions that, in turn, produce outcomes none of the parties would otherwise have chosen." Similarly, Chinese and Western scholars obsess over the possibility of a Thucydides trap. That mutual threat perception by both sides will make them take actions that will increase that threat perception to the point that war is increasingly likely. More than 2,400 years ago, the Athenian historian Thucydides wrote, "It was the rise of Athens and the spear that this inspired in Sparta that made war inevitable." Xi himself addressed this concern in a speech he made in Seattle during his state visit to the United States in September 2015. He said, "There is no such thing as the so-called Thucydides trap in the world. But should major countries time and again make the mistakes of strategic miscalculation, they might create such traps for themselves." Xi's approach to foreign affairs fits into the neo-realist school, which is basically that all states pursue their own interests and states should be suspicious of other countries' intentions. In many ways, this is a zero-sum worldview. But publicly, Xi espouses a highly idealized worldview in promoting a, quote, new type of international relations, or establishing a, quote, community of common destiny, where old ideas of power and politics and Cold War mentality are cast aside. At a conference in 2017, Xi said, "We should foster a new type of international relations featuring win-win cooperation. And we should forge a partnership of dialogue with no confrontation, and a partnership of friendship rather than alliance. All countries should respect each other's sovereignty, dignity, and territorial integrity, respect each other's development path and its social systems, and respect each other's core interests and major concerns. What we hope to create is a big family of harmonious coexistence. These are fine words, and they certainly appeal to many countries, but they are not an accurate reflection of China's intentions. China has a zero-sum mindset that Xi cloaks in the propaganda of his win-win rhetoric for international consumption. Propaganda aside, one of the reasons that Xi is a very popular leader in China is that he has been willing to say out loud the things that Chinese leaders since 1978 have been careful to avoid, things that express China's sense of grievance. He has also moved past rhetoric claiming that China is merely a developing country, to unashamedly acknowledging China as a great power with ambitions to match. For much of the opening and reform period, ambitious Chinese have left to pursue graduate education in the West, predominantly in the United States. Most who have stayed have been very successful in their adopted homelands, leading many of my Chinese friends to joke that the Chinese dream is to live the American dream. Increasingly, there have been substantial incentives and opportunities back in China, and those who have returned from overseas have found similar success in China's breakneck growth. Xi Jinping, just after becoming Party General Secretary in late 2012, used the term the Chinese dream to describe the long-standing goal of the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation. Xi himself may have learned the power of the American dream during his early 30s, when in 1985 he spent several weeks with a family in Muscatine, Iowa, to learn about American agricultural practices. Xi also established two centennial goals. First, that China become a moderately well-off society by the 100th anniversary of the founding of the Chinese Communist Party in 2021, and a fully developed nation by the 100th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic in 2049. Beyond the national goals of the China Dream, Xi Jinping recognizes its power as an individual aspiration for the rising nation. He has called upon young people to, quote, dare to dream, work assiduously to fulfill the dreams, and contribute to the revitalization of the nation, end quote. He also called on the Chinese government at all levels to create ideal conditions for the rising generation's career development. As Harvard University professor Graham Allison put it, what Xi Jinping calls the China Dream expresses the deepest aspirations of hundreds of millions of Chinese, who wish not only to be rich but also powerful. At the core of China's civilizational creed is the belief, or conceit, that China is the center of the universe. In the oft-repeated narrative, a century of Chinese weakness led to exploitation and national humiliation by Western colonists in Japan. In Beijing's view, China is now restored to its rightful place, where its power commands recognition of and respect for China's core interests. A key element of Xi Jinping's push for great power status is for China to be restored to what it sees as its natural position as the preeminent power in Asia. China has traditionally seen itself as the center of the world, but during the dynastic era, the world was basically limited to East Asia, Southeast Asia, and parts of Central Asia. Even with its growing ambitions, China still largely respects spheres of influence, seeing the U.S. as the natural master of the Western Hemisphere, Russia over Eurasia, India over South Asia, and the UK, France, and Germany as the natural leaders of Europe. What really bothers the Chinese is the sway the U.S. continues to have over Asian affairs, with a powerful navy, treaty allies, and major bases and military assets in the Western Pacific. First thing first, China wants to ease the U.S. out of Asia. This has to be done carefully to avoid creating pushback or alarming China's neighbors. The first step of that effort has been largely completed, which is deep economic integration with the other countries of East Asia. China is now the largest trading partner of every country in East and Southeast Asia, as well as with Australia and New Zealand, the result of a shift that has happened in the past 20 years. The second step to push out the U.S. and become the undisputed power in Asia has been China's effort to build a sense of common Asian identity and play on the real concerns that many Asian countries have over the way the U.S. exercises its power. Xi Jinping has tried to exploit this Asia for the Asians sentiment, most famously at a regional security conference in Shanghai in May 2014 when he said, "Matters in Asia ultimately must be taken care of by Asians. Asia's problems ultimately must be resolved by Asians, and Asia's security ultimately must be protected by Asians." Chinese leaders are careful to avoid mentioning the U.S. by name, although it is clear what they are talking about. At the same conference, for example, Xi said, Strengthening military alliances with a third party does not benefit the maintenance of regional security. Other Chinese leaders often refer to outside powers or extra-regional countries. China's current top diplomat, State Councilor Yang Jiechi, in a speech at Tsinghua University the following month said, "Asian countries have the wisdom and capability to promote peace and prosperity in the region through enhanced cooperation. Countries outside the region should take into full account the real conditions of the region, respect the reasonable concerns of the regional countries, and join us in working to enhance rather than compromise regional security and development." China's third step has been to deepen its regional diplomatic efforts, promoting regional forums that exclude the U.S., such as the Conference on Interaction and Confidence-Building Measures, formerly the Shanghai Forum, that focuses on Central Asia, and ASEAN Plus 3 that focuses on Southeast Asia. At the same time, China works to prevent forums that include the U.S., such as the ASEAN Regional Forum, APEC, or the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, which includes the U.S., Japan, Australia, and India, from becoming anti-China focused. Chinese leaders frequently schedule high-level visits to Asian countries just before or after senior U.S. visits to blunt the effectiveness of the U.S. message. Again, even though these actions are a fairly transparent effort to replace the U.S. as the preeminent power in Asia, China claims that is not its intention. Xi Jinping has often said, for example, that the Pacific Ocean is big enough to accommodate both China and the United States. This formulation is a shift, essentially recognizing the U.S. as a Pacific power, but suggesting that the U.S. should stay on its side and China should have free range over its side. Now that we've laid down some of Xi's ideology, our next lecture will look at how China's behavior has changed under Xi, with the massive island-building effort in the South China Sea,